Hello, everyone. This is your girl, Shade. Welcome to another episode of the Win in STEM podcast. Happy Wednesday. I hope you're having a great week so far, and I hope this episode makes your week even better. For our first-time listeners, Win in STEM is a platform to highlight successful people of color STEMists to show others how to get a seat at the table and win in science, technology, engineering, and math. So my ultimate goal here is to help retain and increase the number of minorities in STEM. So today is a very special day. Not only do we have one special guest, we have two special guests with us today from the Mathematically Uncensored Podcast. Thank you, Dr. Pamela Harris and Dr. Aris Winger, for being here today. How are y'all?
We're doing good.
Good. Yeah, we are good. I was waiting for you to say something first. So before
Yeah,
You're doing fantastic. Go ahead.
Super excited to be here and just get to share some space and talk a little bit about what it's like being a mathematician of color.
Yes.
Great. So before we get started, one of the things we do on the podcast is to allow our guests to introduce themselves. So basically, unapologetically, I'm telling our listeners who you are, what you do. If you want to share any accomplishments, definitely tell us about Mathematically Uncensored Podcast and how it started, all the good stuff. So this is your time to shine. The floor is yours.
I will let Dr. Aris Winger go.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. And what you just said about us authentically introducing ourselves is unfortunately unusual.
Yeah.
And so, I really appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, no, I'm Aris Winger. I'm currently in Georgia with my wife and daughter. I'm originally from Washington, D.C. I am an assistant professor at Georgia Gwinnett College. I teach and am the mathematical director at Hybrid Education of Greater Atlanta, which is an alternative high school and middle school for students who don't fit into the traditional toxic culture of regular high school and middle schools. And I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mathematics Enrichment for Diversity and Learning. And so Pamela and I have been doing a lot of work in making visible people of color and other marginalized communities in the mathematical sciences and STEM in general. So that's a little bit of the work that I'm doing. And we'll also do the podcast, but we'll talk about that in a second. Dr. Harris.
Hello. Okay, so I am Pamela Harris. I was born in Mexico and I immigrated to the States twice. The final time when we stayed, I was 12 and we lived in Wisconsin. And I did my schooling from middle school all the way to Ph.D. in Milwaukee. And I got an associate's degree from Milwaukee Area Technical College. I went to Marquette University for a bachelor's, and then my master's and PhD were both from the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. My academic journey took me for my first job to West Point in New York. And so I trained leaders of character for the U.S. Army. I did that for 4 years before beginning my tenure track position at Williams College here in the beautiful Purple Valley is what it's called in Western Mass. So now I'm an associate professor of mathematics. And as Aris said, we've been just doing a lot of professional development for educators, really centering the experiences of students of color in a mathematical classroom, but also thinking a lot about how we can become advocates, how we move from being passive bystanders who see all of these injustices happening in the world and really move to action. And so that's a calling that I think has really just filled me with so much joy to get to do this work with Aris. He inspires me, he motivates me, and he just pushes me to be a better person. And so I'm so excited for us to talk a little bit about the podcast. And so maybe I'll turn it over to him to give us some of how that started.
Yeah, no, and thank you for that. Pamela's also, just completely changed my life in the way that, she pushes me as well. And you'll hear that from the podcast from the jump, right? She threatened to fight me 2 episodes ago. So that gives you an idea. So, no, the podcast in one way, is similar. a lot to what you had just said, Sade, about yours, is that authentically, how can we create a space in which we talk about issues for people of color in the mathematical sciences, a place that over the last, few centuries has not been for us at all,
Hmm.
right? And so we both understand the importance of STEM and mathematics, and we also understand that our experiences are important enough to talk about solely and uniquely as the center of the conversation. And
Yeah.
so when we look at these disciplines, we don't see ourselves enough. And at some point, we just decided, through the leadership of the Center for Mathematical, for the Center for Minorities in Mathematical Sciences, that we can do this shit ourselves, right? And this is what's so inspirational about you, Sade, and the leadership at the center, is that we said, you know what, we don't have to wait on somebody else to tell us that this is okay to do,
Mm.
right? That we have voices. Our voices deserve to be heard by people who are also in the same, discipline as us and on the same road as us, and that we can inspire each other and uplift each other without needing anybody else to do it.
Mm.
And without also needing their approval, which has been
Yes.
something that I've struggled my entire life with. That as an academic, we need approval for the work that we do constantly, consistently, and that approval comes from white people.
Yeah.
And so, without that pressure of needing an approval source, that we could, as Aris, you just said, that we could just do this ourselves and that we didn't need to seek that, that for me has been life transformative.
Mm.
But that's what we do at the podcast. Our tagline is we have these complex conversations about real topics, but we try not to be discreet about it. And so we tend to get into the nitty gritty of the experiences that we have as people of color in math. And so we hope that your listeners maybe are interested in checking some of those episodes out.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not easy, right? There's some things
No,
that
not
I've
at
said
all.
that are just like, oh
Not
my
at
God, did I
all.
just say that? Right? Like, who's going to fire me this week because I just said that, right? But
Yeah.
these are things that need to be said, because in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do is change the narratives that are in a discipline that have been so long unchallenged, uninterrogated, and have just been accepted as rules. Like there's so many things that we need to say, actually, no, that's not okay,
Right.
right? And too often we can't, and we've tried to go into other spaces and say that's not okay. You might imagine some of the pushback that you get, right? And so
Mm.
instead, let's create our own space to call out some of these things and center our
Mhm.
experiences.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I'm so glad we're able to collaborate with each other on our podcast. And I know that our listeners will definitely appreciate this. So, our last episode was a huge hit. We talked about securing the bag, how to land your dream job, and it was basically an audio playbook from finding a job to crafting the perfect resume to crushing the interview, the do's and don'ts of compensation, and so much more. So, listeners, if you haven't tuned in to that episode, make sure you go and listen.
I know how I'm spending an hour today.
That's
I
right.
know I'm listening to that.
Yes.
I need
Yes.
to know that. Yeah.
Definitely. So after that episode, I thought about it. We should be securing all good things in 2021. So
Yes.
let's secure the degree. So in this episode, I want to discuss shared tips for people of color on how to effectively apply to graduate school. And this could be getting your master's or PhD in STEM.
Yeah.
I was trying to do some research, but I don't know why it was so difficult finding updated stats on the number of people of color in STEM graduate
Oh,
programs.
yes.
Like,
Mm.
I couldn't
Yes.
find anything for 2020 or at least 2019.
Yes.
But, the bottom line is Blacks and Hispanics remain underrepresented at every degree level in STEM. So I can
Yes.
only imagine what the percentage is for each field. It's crazy.
Yes. And so, yeah, I mean, and there may be a reason why this information isn't out there. It's because the powers that be are not, effectively collecting these numbers. And so this is part of the work that we're also trying to do, is to try to make those numbers as clear as possible. right? Because it's one of the ways that we can continue to make the argument that they are not doing the job that they are supposed to be doing. But the numbers are super, super low. There's
They're
just no
very
doubt
low.
about that. Yeah, that we don't see ourselves in the discipline at all. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, we're trying to fix that. And so, yeah, if you want to secure a degree, the first thing that I think about really is what is the mindset that you have, right? And so
Mhm.
you're going to be, presumably leaving with a bachelor's in something. And then you have to decide, for me, it was like this combination of what is it that I want to do? Like, do I want to go, you know, is my orientation to make money? Because I was going to be an actuary,
Ooh,
right?
that
Because I was all
money,
about, oh, yes. I
the
was all about the
paychecks.
money. Yes. So sophomore, like I was just like, let me just be an actuary. And then I had my linear algebra teacher just say, well, you know what? I think you can get a PhD in mathematics if you want it. I was like, oh, wow. I never considered that. Right.
Yeah.
And so at this point for me, it was this decision between did I want to be, go into the job market industry and make more money, which is fine to have that type of lifestyle, or was there something that was burning in me to learn more about the subject of mathematics in itself? And
Mhm.
so I went the route of the PhD because I went to RAUs and had experiences. It was like, ooh, research and teaching. This really, really interests me. Now, if I had gone to, the actuarial boot camp, I may be in a completely different place, right?
Yeah.
But for me, it is like if you want to get an advanced degree in something, just having that tied to the plan of what you're trying to do, right? So I know that some people can get a master's and then that'll really help in the area that they want to go in industry, right?
Mhm.
For me though, the PhD space is, I mean, you got to be a little bit crazy to get a PhD, right? I mean, in the sense that, you have to be crazy about your subject. You have to be
Mhm.
committed to, there's something burning within you to want to go that deep, to spend years and years and years in your subject to become an expert in it across the board, right? Which is great, right? But there's some sense of not needing to go that deep if you want to go in industry and make a lot of money, or go in industry and work for a company, or go in industry and start your own thing, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. And one of the things that strikes me in what you're saying, Aris, I wanted to say that at least in mathematics, getting a PhD or a graduate education is free. And let me
Oh,
stress
yes.
that because
Yes.
I
Free.
find that, yeah, right. Let me say that
Minus
again.
our perks.
It
Okay.
is
Yeah.
free. So when Aris is talking about, him having a desire to potentially go become an actuary or potentially, continue on to a PhD, for me, I knew that I wanted to study more math. I didn't know that that was an option. I too had a math professor who said, when you go to graduate school, and therefore that changed my life completely. But the thing that I didn't understand that she taught me was that when you finish an undergrad degree, I mean, I had, thousands and thousands of dollars in debt, and I had
Mm.
transferred to a 4-year university. So really those, 25K, 22,000, I think is something around that number is what I owed. When she said, when you go to graduate school, I was like, with what money?
Right.
Like, does
Right.
she just think I'm gonna be like, Mama, Daddy, can I just borrow 100K so I can go get this PhD in math? Like, that makes no
A
sense.
small loan of one.
That's
$1
right.
million. Yes, that was not about to happen. And so, what she followed up that conversation with was, here's how graduate school works in the mathematical sciences. And I know for certain other STEM fields are like this. You
Mhm.
apply to your graduate program. If you get in, they offer you either a position that's known as a TA-ship. And so, what that means is that you might be responsible for teaching 2 courses a semester. And then in lieu of that, you get your tuition waived. So you do not pay tuition. You get your health insurance covered throughout your entire year. And then you also get on top of that a stipend. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to get wealthy off of your graduate TA-ship. Let
You
me
won't.
just you
Okay.
won't. You're poor still, but you get on the order of $18,000 to $20,000. Now, of course, that amount goes way further if you live in the Midwest than if you live in Southern Cali, So make choices accordingly. But for me, that was one of the reasons why pursuing a PhD felt like it was a reasonable thing to do, to go and dedicate myself fully, immerse myself fully in mathematics for 5 years, knowing that at the end of that, I was not going to have $100,000 debt
Yes.
looming over me. And so for those of you that are thinking, I can't go to graduate school, I have student loans. First off, those student loans will get deferred during the time that you get your PhD. So,
Yeah.
I didn't have to pay my undergrad debt until after I graduated with my PhD. And then I didn't get into further debt by getting a
Right.
PhD. And so I want to stress that because I wish I would have known that way earlier. I learned that, and I applied to graduate programs like, within a month of each other. And so we need to do better at letting students know, especially people of color, that going to get a graduate degree, shouldn't, at least in STEM, is not going to set you back. It's really
Right.
going to propel you forward.
That's really
Yes.
good to know. I had no idea that you can get a graduate degree for free. Now
Oh,
that
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it'll cost you some tears and
Oh
some
yes.
late
After
nights,
yes.
no
Hours.
sleeps, it'll cost you in other ways, but certainly not financially.
So, in the process of getting a graduate degree, is there, how do I say this, like a preference, or should I take like a year off? Should I work
Mm.
first, so then go to school? I know there's probably pros and cons for each, but what is the most preferred, or what do you usually see people do when getting a graduate school degree?
I think a variety.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah. So I have a student currently that I literally just had this conversation with him a week ago. And the conversation was like, I have multiple job offers to go into industry, but I also got into a graduate program. What do I do now? And my advice to him was very much in line with the advice that my actual PhD advisor gave me, which was, how much do you need the money and how much of it do you need?
Right.
And that was a conversation that's actually quite eye-opening, because I feel like I don't have a lot of conversations with people about money, although my family has them, right? Like people in my family are just like, how much that job gonna pay you, so that they can tell you whether they think they're trying to rip you off or not. But aside from that, I don't have conversations with people about money. And so I think we have to acknowledge that, again, we don't know people's finances, and industry positions are extremely lucrative. And
Yes.
for a student who is thinking of taking a gap year and taking a job that's going to make them six figures, and maybe they're going to pay off debt that they have from undergrad, and if they're really like, I know I want to go get this PhD, 1 year, I'm just going to grind, secure the bag,
Yes.
make this money and then pay off this debt and then return and go to graduate school. I think that's completely acceptable. There's nothing wrong with that. The only challenge is that sometimes you might just really enjoy the job.
Or the money that you're making.
And the money. Yeah.
Yes.
And then you
and the
might never go
lifestyle.
back.
Absolutely. I think
Although,
that's
is
one
that
of the biggest
bad?
ones.
Is that
No,
bad?
it's not
Chris?
bad. No, I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that let's just be honest, that you'll get to but because getting a PhD, getting a master's, nothing's good or bad. It's just what you want to do with your life, right?
Right.
And so just recognizing that you can't make 60, 70, 80, 100 and then be like, okay, I'm gonna just switch and make 20 while I also
You make
take
that sound so
classes.
fun.
Yeah, no, I mean, let's just be honest. Like that is a
Mhm.
complete change in lifestyle. So I've seen lots of people say, I'm going to take a year off, and then they don't want to go back, right? Because
Mhm.
of the lifestyle change. Because who wants to go from, eating one thing to having ramen? You
Right.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So in my case, so I went to UMass Amherst, was there for 5 years, and I decided to go into industry. So I was in the industry for about a year and a half, and then I went to get my master's part-time while I was still working. But the challenge that I went through was just getting back into the groove for schoolwork.
Yeah.
Like I
Yes.
remember my first year, I'm like, man, do I really need this degree? Like,
Yes. Yes.
I'm
Yes.
making money already. Like, do I
Yes.
need extra headache?
Right.
Right.
But thank God, like I went through it, got my
But what
master's.
kept you going? Like, why did you continue?
That so getting a graduate degree has always been my goal. So I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want this challenge of, this transition period to get in the way, because I know I would overcome it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just had to remind myself, okay, Shada, this was your goal. You need to, stick with it, right?
Yes.
And then fortunately, my job was able to pay for my master's. So that was another way for me to stick with the program, right? And get good grades and not, slack. Because my employer at that time, we had to get a B and above, and then they'll pay for your course.
Yeah.
But once your grades start slipping, all this money is coming out of your pocket.
Oh,
So
That's a
no.
motivation right there.
yeah,
Yes.
so that definitely motivated me to keep my game up and not enjoy life too much. But yeah, it definitely depends on the person and your goals and like your mindset for deciding on when to pursue your graduate degree.
Yeah.
So, when looking for graduate programs, what is your advice? Does the role of the university's reputation or brand really matter?
Yeah, we've been working on this really, really hard the
Yeah.
last few months and years, really. I mean, because where we have gone, where we have started, where here's how it used to be. It used to be go to a place by name only,
Mm-hmm.
right? So just get into the quote best school possible, and that was tied to name recognition, and that
Right.
was tied to and what we have come to realize in doing this work and really having the conversations is that choosing a place to go has to be way more
Mm,
multidimensional,
Yes.
right? So you certainly would like name recognition and a good school, top program, all of that, right? But at what expense, right? And
Yes.
so this is especially true for us as people of color going into these programs that have a sense of what the people who get those degrees look like, and they
Mm-hmm.
don't look like us. And so now when we start to think about a program, we not only have to ask about is the program competent in providing me with expertise, but also is it in a space that's welcoming for me, right? And that
Yeah.
means that you need to be asking them questions about, particularly if you're doing the PhD level. Now, it may be the case that, if you're getting a master's, that you might be able to get out a year or a year and a half, in a place that may not, be so welcoming to you. But for the PhD, when you're doing 4,
mhm,
5, 6 years in a place, then you really have
Yeah.
to start asking deep. It's a big, big investment of your life. And so now you have to ask, do I want to move to Mississippi? You
Mm.
know what I mean? Do I, you know what I mean? Do I want
Mm.
to be, your analytics program is amazing. Do I want to live in Mississippi for 6 years?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and so it's those types of questions that we're bringing up finally for the first time as we have deeper voices, right? And by the way, this work has been done, on the sly, but now we're just talking it out so everybody can hear that no, we're not coming to you, Yale, because of that incident and that incident and that incident might mean that, maybe I shouldn't be in that
mhm,
space, right? So I do think it's super personal to the person, right? You have to say, okay, how much, what type of degree am I trying to get and what type of place am I trying to get it? And then say, let me look at that place. Let me talk to the people in that department. Let me see what the environment is like between the master's and the
mm,
PhD.
Yeah. The culture and the climate of a graduate program will dictate how
mm,
successful you will be.
Yes. Yeah,
And
because too often we think it's only whether I can pass the
uh,
classes and the exams, and we don't think about that other stuff Pamela's mentioning.
yeah, and the thing is that when you get to graduate school, you're going to have to work with other people, right? The mathematics, at least in a PhD program for math, the math is just so freaking hard that you need to have a cohort. You want to have people to talk math with. You want to feel part of a community. At least for me as a person of color, I needed all of those things. And the truth is that not every graduate program provides that. And so, is it better to go to a quote unquote highly ranked institution and then not graduate, even though maybe you were there 4
mm,
years? or maybe go to a school that is going to provide maybe more support, more structure. They know the additional burdens that, you know, students of color face in these spaces, and then have the support to be able to graduate.
Yes.
Right? At the end of the day, and I say this to all my students, I'm like, a PhD is a PhD is a PhD. You need to finish that PhD, because if you go somewhere, you know, with name recognition and you don't graduate, guess what? You don't put on your CV or on your resume, well, I tried graduate school for 4 years
That's
and
right.
didn't complete my degree. You don't
Yeah.
even mention it. So then
That's right.
at that point, you might as well have gone out to industry and you know, made bank during those 4 years.
Wow.
That's the Puff Daddy principle. He went to Howard. He didn't graduate.
Oh,
but
really?
he
I didn't
went.
even know that.
Right.
I like that. Puff
Yeah.
Daddy principle.
That's
That's the Puff
hilarious.
Daddy. Yeah. And he throws great homecoming parties, but he didn't graduate.
He didn't graduate.
P. Diddy, let me see your resume. Let me see your LinkedIn real quick.
That's right.
We coming for him.
Not to Puff. No, look, Puff's a billionaire. I'm not talking.
I know.
I'm just saying that, like, let's just call it what it is.
Yeah, it is.
But P. Diddy, if you're listening, you know, we accept sponsorship, so no shade.
That's right.
We do. Scholarships for other people. Yep.
That's right.
So for the application process, like what's needed, you know, for a person of color, what strategies are there that I can, you know, to stand out in a competitive pool? Or let's say I'm not yet applying to grad school yet. What should I be
Yeah.
doing now to make me a great applicant when I start applying?
So one of the things that I say to my students all the time is to build, of course, you want good grades, right? Like, okay, there's some clear kind of things. Like you want to work really hard at your classes. You want to try to maximize your grades, your GPA, those, you know, graduate readiness entrance exams, you know, your graduate GRE exam scores. You want to maximize all of those things. But here's the other thing that I always missed that I wish somebody would have said to me. Those letters of recommendation from your professors matter, and they matter a whole lot. You want to build strong relationships with your professors because they're going to be able to highlight things in your application. If there is an issue with a course, or, you know, they can address those things in ways that you might not need to. And so building relationships with professors, figuring out, you know, what is your professor doing in terms of research? Is there a possibility that you might get involved during the summer? You know, could you work in their lab? Can you compute? You know, can you code something up for them to facilitate some of their work? Getting involved in that kind of process strengthens your application in ways that traditional coursework does not allow room for. And so finding those opportunities, I think, is key, as well as then building those relationships so that your letters of recommendation are just incredibly strong.
Yeah, and I second that. I mean, I think that when you're in a graduate department and you're reading letters of recommendation, then it's almost like you're reading from somebody who is in the same boat as you, and they can speak to some of your skills, to some of the student skills that the student may not be able to communicate, but the person who's writing and the person who's reading it are talking in the same language, right? And so what I had learned from people was that, you know, in letters of recommendation, if you're writing one for somebody, to just say, here's how I know this person and here are the things this person can do. And when you list the things that that person can do, all those things are tied to being successful in the program. So that when the program reads it, it's like, oh, this person clearly belongs and can fit in this place.
That's what I love it. And I think this is where allyship really comes into play, building your allies, your community, not only with students, but professors, with advisors in your school. So when it's time to apply, you already have a network of people who will be by your side to advocate for you.
That's right. Yes, mentorship is huge here,
Yes.
right? And just getting somebody who knows and can help you, you know, with the ins and outs of the process.
Yeah, and I also think part of the networking aspect can come from having a good, strong relationship with a mentor at your institution. So I think a lot about the fact that I connect my students to my external network. And now that we're virtual, it actually facilitates things a little bit easier. So, for example, one of my students is also co-advised by one of my good collaborators. And so him and I mentor one of my thesis students at my college. And so all of a sudden, now there's an additional person who could write a letter of recommendation from an external institution, right? And so those are things that are really wonderful to have as a student, to have the network, to really get those letters of recommendation and to learn more about what other options there are. Because, having one mentor is good. Having two is twice as good.
Definitely.
This does has me have me thinking though about someone who would take a gap year and then come back and how their
Mm,
letters look because
yeah.
you go back then after and some people don't even know they're taking a gap year.
Yeah.
Let's be clear. They take a year and they're like, "Wait, you know what? Maybe I want to go do this thing now." So then you have to go back and find people to write you these letters
Mhm.
now, right?
Yeah.
So how would you have to deal with that, right? Or how is it that you would get the people that you work with, in industry, maybe to write something as well, to talk about the skills that you have, right? Those are things that you might want to also
That's a good
consider.
point. Yeah. Because if you take a gap year, if you haven't maintained that relationship with professors in undergrad, another avenue would be having your manager or a lead at your
Mm,
corporate and the industry that you're working to speak on your behalf.
yeah. Is that what you did? Did you have them write you some letters or did you have to write letters
Yes,
for your master's?
I needed a recommendation, so I used my manager and my lead at that time supported me. That's one
Mm,
thing
Hmm.
going into industry that I expressed that I wanted to do my master's. So my manager already knew that that was something that's going to come down the line. So he was on board from day one.
yeah. So you're helping me here because it reminds me that we need to be clear to people what our bigger
Hmm.
vision is ahead of time. So this lets me know that we should impart upon people that even as you're leaving undergrad, that if you even have a notion of maybe going to grad school later, that you continue to keep your relationships with your mentors and professors, and you let them know that, I might be coming back to you, for a letter because I have in my future going to graduate school. And so just give you a heads up about that so that they aren't shocked or
Hmm.
surprised, when that
Yeah.
happens.
So I know we talked briefly about funding earlier, and we talked about TA shifts. Are there any other funding opportunities out there for people of color? What are your top tips for getting funding and using securing the bag to secure the degree?
Oh, certainly. So the National Science Foundation has a graduate fellowship program. And so I certainly encourage students, all students to apply, but in particular students of color. These are highly competitive, yes, but you don't get any if you don't
Mhm.
apply. And so applying for these, you can apply for them the year that you're graduating and then also one additional year afterwards. So if you don't get it the first time, you will get feedback on the
Mhm.
application. They will tell you where you might strengthen that application and then you just apply the following year. So I think even just the strategy of let me just apply to get some feedback on how I might make this better, and even if you're like, if I don't get it, I don't get it, right? Like we can't, and that's something I struggle with when I apply for something, thinking I might not get this, so why should I even
Mhm.
bother? But the idea here is it is about incrementally improving your application materials. And so highly suggest apply to the National Science Foundation for funding. There's also a really wonderful fellowship. It's called the SMART Fellowship, and so these are fellowships, I believe, through the Department of Defense. They fund you for up to 3 years of graduate school on the order of about 30,000. And then you don't have to teach or anything like that at your institution. They also cover your tuition. And then for these fellowships, they actually set you up with an internship position during the summers so that you can get some experience working at a national lab. That fellowship does come with some strings attached. I mean, they give you quite a bit of money and they ask that you be employed by a lab after completing your PhD or master's degree. I believe they also support master's degree. There's also the Ford Fellowship. So there's a ton of fellowships. Certainly, a quick Google search, you'll find STEM
Mhm.
opportunities and funding. Of course, graduate programs also have faculty who have grants. And so there's times where you, depending on your experience and your background, you might also ask if there are research assistantships available. And so these would be similar to your TA-ship, but instead of having to do teaching, you would do some research with a faculty member in the department. And so there are many, many opportunities available for us to apply. And then, what I would just suggest, so I gave you just a few names, but certainly please do reach out to your career offices at your colleges. They tend to have a lot of lists available as you're looking to pursue further education.
Yeah, you can also contact the department as well. And in a lot of STEM disciplines, it is going to be tied to the faculty member in terms of the lab and the money that they have, right? A lot of times in other disciplines other than math, that the professor will have money and will be supporting the student directly. And so you might want to go ahead and look and see what the faculty members in the department are doing and what their research interests are and the funding that they have.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not sure if this organization still exists. I know in undergrad, when I was doing research on graduate programs, there was the GEM Fellowship. I think that's what it's called, GEM Fellowship, and they also supported people of color getting their master's and PhD and paid a significant amount. So definitely check that out too, listeners. So let's talk about the interview process. Is there an interview process for graduate school?
Not quite an interview process, but when you do get an acceptance, they usually will fly. Okay, pre-pandemic life, graduate programs tend to have some funds set aside to bring graduate students to do a campus visit. And so most of the time that means, they'll fly you in maybe on a Friday with a group of other applicants that have been accepted to the program. And then you get to hang out with faculty. You get to see what the departments are like. Maybe you stay the Monday and then you see what some of the graduate courses are like. And then, check out the area to see if that's where you might want to live for 5 or 6 years of your life. And so they do fly you out. They kind of do the wine and dine, maybe minus the wine. But they do that process of really trying to share with you what it would be like to be there as a graduate student. And so you get to interact. And I think what's important is interact with other graduate students and get a pulse on what the climate and the culture of that department is like, and to see if that's the kind of place where you would thrive.
Yeah, and so during that time, you'll meet faculty, students, and you just get an idea of the culture of the place for a couple of days.
Oh, that's interesting. Didn't know that. So after getting accepted, you go on this trip, meet the faculty, other potential students who may be joining that program as well.
And that might be before you get accepted too.
Oh, really?
Yes, just they can bring you out just to tour the place and talk with the faculty before.
Oh. So let's say we have a person who has 5 graduate acceptance letters on the table.
Okay.
They're star, they're popping. So as an applicant, what should they consider when making the final decision? What questions should they be asking the schools to determine if they are the best fit for them?
Oof.
Yes. Just that's all you want to know, right? So, yeah, no, I mean, so I think there's going to be a list. I think that we each need to list what our personal needs are. So there are going to be some general things that you need to ask, right? So what is the average time to finishing? What do you all do to support it? What's the plan? Right. So from me stepping on campus the first time to me getting a PhD or me getting a master's, what are the rules and procedures that need to be done in order for that to happen? Right. So just procedurally and technically, what has to happen, what needs to be passed, what tests do I need to take? And then there's a whole personal element that you need to figure out about what you value that I didn't think about at all. Like I was just going to Pittsburgh. Like if you had told me, like if I had done research on Pittsburgh and on, Pennsylvania at the time or whatever, I might have made some different decisions, right? I didn't consider where I was going at all, right? And so whatever it is because I was really young and naive, right?
Yeah.
But like if you're going to decide to go to graduate school, then you have to say, okay, what are the things that are important to me? I care about this. I care about yoga. I care about, personal time. I care about connecting with people that look like me, right? And so in a lot of ways, those things also come on your list, and you need to be asking those things as well. So I feel like there's the technical, logistical, how do I get this degree? And then there is a list of things that are personal to you that you need in order to live in a place, that you would also be asking of them as well. And too often that personal list we have not made as something that we would ask departments, but we're suggesting you need to ask them because they're asking you to come and be a part of their space too.
That's right. I also find that now that in retrospect, I would ask what percentage of students of color who start your graduate program actually complete the program.
Yes.
Because we don't know. We don't know if you're the first, I don't know, Black woman to show up in their space.
That matters.
And that matters.
Yes.
That matters.
Yes.
And the other thing that I think about asking them is, how do they support students if something goes wrong? And that can be very broadly interpreted, right? That could be, and I say this because I think back to my graduate experience, and one of my friends in the program, she was diagnosed with a chronic illness during the process of completing her graduate degree. And it was quite telling that they didn't know how to help, right? They didn't know how to help. There was just like no system in place to help her so that she could continue her education if she wanted to. And so those are things that we don't know what tomorrow will bring, unfortunately. And it's better to just be ready and to say, they're not going to pull that acceptance from you if you ask these questions first and foremost. Yeah. Okay, let's be clear. So you can say to them, how have you dealt with students who might find themselves in a financial challenge? Because you're being asked to move potentially across the country. And let me tell you something. Sometimes you start these graduate programs in August and your first check doesn't come until October. And I was in no position to be supporting myself, fully. Thankfully my partner had a good job, but like if it would have just been me and my graduate degree, like I would have been in deep trouble during those months. And so those are questions that we should be asking before you take an acceptance. Or, for example, what kind of funding for summer? Is there additional funding? Is there an additional teaching responsibilities? Just expectations that might not be clear from the get-go are kinds of questions. Or like even just flat out asking them, what do you wish you would have known about being in these spaces?
Yeah.
And those are good questions to ask graduate students as well. You'll get a lot from graduate students. I find that asking them a lot of questions can be really beneficial.
How would I go about finding grad students that are already in a program? Is it just like a simple, LinkedIn search and sending?
Yeah, most of them are already a website. They're usually on the website, right? So yeah, they're listed on the website of the school a lot of the times. And then, if you can check mathematical spaces online, like they might be giving posters and so forth if you do a search for the school.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, the more information you're able to get a feel about the program, especially if you're staying there for, a number of years, 5-6 years, it's your new home. It's good to know what you're getting yourself into before making that big decision.
Yeah, absolutely. The one other thing that I would also say is that you are also interviewing these places, right? Like you will end up showing up into these spaces and you have a lot to contribute. I hate this feeling that I had as a graduate student that somehow like somebody did me a favor by allowing me to go to graduate school. No one is doing you a favor. Like you are going to work extremely hard, whether it is through a TA-ship and you're going to be doing teaching, or whether it is through a research fellowship, you will be doing research. Like no one's doing you a favor. So asking these hard questions from the beginning really sets the tone for whether that is the right environment for you to thrive in, right? Like I want people of color to thrive in graduate programs. I don't want them to thrive in spite of being in terrible graduate programs, which tends to be the experience I see. And so please ask these questions, especially if you have, multiple offers from graduate programs. No one is doing you a favor. You deserve to be in these spaces, but we have to acknowledge that academic spaces were not built with people like us in mind.
Right.
And so then we
And
have to work harder at uncovering what the problems might be before we dive, deep into being in that space.
that's right. And this is where we can borrow from industry in the ways that you all have interviews and you all demand certain things and say, here are the things that I need. Are you paying for my moving expenses? Are you
Exactly.
right? There's a lot more self-advocacy, I feel, in the industry application process than it is in our process. And so that's part of the work that we're doing. We're saying, no, understand your worth and understand that, yeah, that this place isn't doing something for you, that this is a collaboration in a lot of ways. I'm coming there, I'm offering value, you're providing me value, and let's work together on this. It's been too one-sided for too long in that
Yes.
sense. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, know yourself, know your worth.
Yes.
You don't need the school needs you.
That's right.
At the
Yes,
end of the
that
day.
is right.
So now that you went through your PhD, working in academia, what advice would you give to your first year self in graduate school? Like, what is something you know now that you wished you knew before?
For me, it would just be definitely ask for help
Mm.
sooner and reframe help as tapping into the resources around you. Right? Because again, I was still just like trying to do my own thing, and I had all these resources around me at a great school. And it wasn't until maybe my second or third year where I was just like, oh, I can do that. Oh, there's money for that. Oh, they get to do that, and I get to do that too. Right? It was just like I would have just stood there and really just written a list or had a conversation with somebody to say, what are all the things I can get here? And then I would have tapped into those things way, way earlier. And so for me, it was just a mindset because I didn't have to do a lot of that at Howard, which was my undergraduate institution, right? They were supportive in ways and putting opportunities in my face.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to Carnegie Mellon, which is an incredible school. But then, like, I was still in the mentality of let me just go to class, let me just go study, let me go to class, let me go study. And it was more than just class and studying. It was making connections. It was using resources that I just didn't see when I was in my first year.
That's powerful. For me, the piece of advice I would give my younger self is that the imposter syndrome is something that you will deal with. You will deal with it for life. But I once asked Dr. Ana Marie Cauche, she's the president of University of Washington, and I asked her, she was on this panel, this was 2015. I mean, this is how like vivid this is in my mind. She gets up there and she gives this beautiful talk about all the things she's been able to accomplish in her life. And I'm sitting here like feeling like such an imposter and just being like, people are going to find out that I don't know half of anything. And I don't remember basic definitions and I'm struggling and I don't belong here. And I went up to that mic and I said, have you ever had the imposter syndrome? And like, how do you get rid of it? And she said these words that have rung in my head, my whole trajectory since then, which is, yes, I've dealt with the imposter syndrome. No, it doesn't go away. It doesn't stop, but it also won't stop me. And so you might feel that imposter syndrome the whole time, but it doesn't mean that it has to stop you from working hard, from doing the things that you need to do to achieve the things that you set as goals for yourself. And so, stare it in the face and be like, not today, imposter syndrome. I'm going to push forward and I'm going to get this done.
Right.
Yes, I totally agree. Wow. I think I'm ready to pursue another graduate degree.
Oh, let's go.
Do it.
PhD, is that you? Dr.
That's
Shane,
right.
is that you?
I love it.
Listen, doctor has a nice ring to it. Let's do it.
It does. But thank you so much, Dr. Harris. Thank you, Dr. Winger, for sharing your insight on securing the degree. Like, the information that we discussed today is very important for our people to be aware so they can be set up for success. And we need more representation in math and STEM as a whole, and others getting their masters, their PhDs, and just getting degrees on whole levels. So thank you both for the work that you're doing in academia and with the Mathematically Uncensored podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Definitely. So our listeners love following up with our guests. Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, so you can do mu@minoritymath.com is our email address. That is come directly to us. Check out the podcast at Mathematically Uncensored, which you can get to through Apple and the other methods, but you can also go to minoritymath.org, which is the website for the Center for Minorities and Mathematical Sciences.
You can also hit us up on Twitter. So my handle is at DPE Harris, and Aris is at Aris Winger.
Awesome. So I'll include all that in the podcast description. But thank you once again for being guests on the podcast. We definitely need to do this again. This is so much fun.
It's a must. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to another episode of the Win in STEM podcast. Make sure to rate, like, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Anchor, Google, all the above. And follow us on Instagram at the Win in STEM podcast. And tag us with your favorite takeaway, your favorite gem that you received today. So enjoy the rest of your week. Until next time, y'all be great and go out and win in STEM. Bye.